With New Zealand's current procurement model and its focus on cost, you working for Pipeline Civil, you understand at the coalface how these things work. So how does that affect the stress levels on site?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I can talk more specifically about the stress levels at the pre-contract phase as a
Right?
starting point, but then I can lead on to on site. So just to paint a bit of a picture, we're considered probably would be a tier two contractor. So we do a lot of subcontracting to tier ones. So what we're often finding is we're getting lump sum, construct only pricing, or sometimes measure and valuable pricing requests through from tier one contracts like the Fulton Hogan, uh, Fletcher, and other partners like Eastern Busway Alliance at the moment. We get packages relatively late in the piece because they have to produce their packages. Occasionally they'll do takeoffs and prepare the documentation. We receive that, and we're often given about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, to prepare a price for what could be easily $10 million packages. So we have a defined timeline in which we have to try and scope our works. We have to digest the packages that have been received. We have to define what our scope of works is. We then need to go engage our subbies or suppliers to get pricing, and then pull all that together and present an offer that protects us both commercially while also being competitive, because almost always as subbies, there's non-price attributes are just out the gate as lowest price straight off, and almost like the bottom line is considered first, and that's when they'll start talking to you. So the stress with that is trying to define the scope and understand what we're being asked to do, both in construction scope but also in commercial risk, which is really hard to define. And I guess that's a real challenge, is how you do that. What it does lead to is I take the approach where we try and define our scope and commercial position very clearly. So we have a huge list of tags. Well, I shouldn't call them clags, I call them clarifications where I can. But my intent with that is to really try and say, this is where we're starting, this is stopping. And these are the errors we've found, or the potential omissions, or the design information that isn't quite right, and try to point ourselves in the right position or place where we've positioned our pricing. Now, that's a lot of work in itself, and you kind of go part way to try and solve the problems that you're finding in those packages. But I'd really like to take to the next step and go, okay, why don't I solve those problems instead of saying I've made a decision, I've excluded it, or I've assumed this, or whatever, and there's still an outstanding issue that has to be addressed at some stage. I'd love the opportunity to try and solve those progressively as a partner. I think that's a real challenge. So if we just take that through the next phase, say we become preferred contractor, we start negotiating a contract, we typically try and resolve a lot of those issues as we go, but sometimes time constraints means that we can't. And therefore, those carry through to the construction phase, and the project manager or likes of this list of clarifications going, oh, these are tags in our contract now, comes through to a new team that's now delivering for the client side as well. And they're just like, what the hell are all these? How are these interpreted? What do these mean? Why are they in here? Why didn't you just price it completely? And well, because we had to clarify, because you didn't give us enough information. Like I mentioned before in our introduction, I just see it as a huge lost opportunity. Why could I not sit down with the head contractor, with the designer, with the principal, and start solving those issues early, so it just flows through, our pricing is more robust, and then our delivery, the tender program, the tender cost, our resourcing is all more accurate, and we deliver a more successful project. So yeah, I guess that's the pain, that's where the stress lies, because those packages just aren't well defined. Design's an issue, like Raine suggested before, often less at a relatively low level of design finalisation. And then the changing over of the teams becomes quite an issue as well, from pre-contract to delivery, and same on the client side.
So Rainey, you deal with the back end of that, don't you?
I do, and coming from
I say we, sorry.
Yeah, we do. Coming from the UK, one of my biggest shocks when I got here was the fact that contractors are expected to work on uncoordinated drawings. In the UK, any of you guys that worked in the UK, the contractor gets, he tends to price off a bill of quantities, and then he gets a set of construction drawings which are fully coordinated. Here, the consultants seem to work in silos. There doesn't seem to be any coordination between the consultants, and therefore, there's no coordination between the drawings either. So, contractors have got to spend a lot of time, going through drawings and making sure that, they're workable, they're not missing anything, which is why we always have huge RFI,
Massive
a
lists.
massive list on every single dispute that we seem to be involved with. If we could actually have consultants working together to provide coordinated drawings to the contractor, then that would go a long way, I think, to actually resolving the issues. But again, you need to complete the design at the start. There's no point just giving contractors bits and pieces to work with. It's just the whole kind of team effort doesn't exist here. And I've run some massive projects in the UK, both civils and vertical building. And one of the key things that actually made those projects a success was communication. I'm not a keyboard kind of person. I'm a go and, walk down the road or go and see them or pick up the phone and actually communicate. And that's what's really lacking here is that communication. It's all kind of done on email. It's all done between lots of different people. There's no accountability of anybody. And this is what I was saying last night, the SEL do on engineers to the contract role. There's nobody accountable across the thing, It's seems to be this kind of free for all, no organisation, no communication, no risk, registers, no, actually sitting down together, identifying all the risks on the projects, allocating them to the person, who's best able to deal with them. I'm used to working under NEC, so the project manager issues an early warning notice, and registered from day one. We're not doing that, and yet we've still got this. We've got an advance notification in the clause 521 in 3910. Only seems to be actually issued by the contractor, never by the engineer to the contractor. And then when he does issue them, nothing's done with them.
Yeah.
So they just sit there, or contractors get accused of being too contractual. So it's just a complete mess.
It's a strange concept, isn't it? Actually completing something before you go to build it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You wouldn't program an automated car factory with 60% of the design. You'd end up with, what would you end up with? Something pretty horrible.
Of a car.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think the model's there to solve that problem. Every time everyone works together earlier, you get a better result. It's proven.
Which is where ECI contractors undertaking ECI phase, or PCSA as it may be called, I feel that they do actually have an opportunity to fulfill a role in that space. You're talking about coordination of design elements within the design offices. I've had a great experience working with design office and actually helping in that coordination, providing that early contract input. And that early contract input is almost a phase that can allow those design leads to come together and actually consolidate. And like you mentioned before, also the use of BIM and smart models these days helps with that hugely.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We had an interesting issue with design construction interface on a job I was working on recently, and I sort of feel like there's a meeting point in the middle for those two teams to better understand each other's problems and the way that they have to operate. And the specific example I'd use is that there's certain elements of design that can only get to 80% without the construction input or the methodology input or the guys out on the site seeing things exactly as they are, whereas the construction guys have got an expectation of more detail and more direction in those spaces. So I've been waging my own independent sort of war against this idea that the design can be complete. And we have this idea that the designers do their work and then off they go. And it just doesn't work like that. It's an ongoing collaborative process of solving those problems. And as you say, if you can get it done before you put a spade in the ground, well, that's better. But there's always going to be things that can't be resolved until that spade is in the ground and we learn what exactly it is that we're dealing with. So
how much of a design is reliant on the temporary works design that feeds into the permanent works design, or how much opportunity is there by integrating temporary works and permanent works designs together? Again, another example, getting in early and collaborating early.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the question I was going to ask you, Raine, when you talked about it was there's absolutely an obligation to communicate better, but there needs to be a willingness and an ownership of who exactly it is that's supposed to own that communication. When you're a project manager, are you prepared to actually step up and be the person who creates that collaborative environment, gets the people in the room, corrals the conversation, makes sure that issues are actually closed out? And it's that willingness that can be missing a little bit. And when we talk about the parts that are missing in the New Zealand contractual environment, you need those individuals who are finicky and are prepared to just keep digging on something until it is done.
Mm.
And if there's a change coming, you say the early warnings come through, right? Someone has to really care about owning that process from start to finish and it being really clear who does. Otherwise, as you say, you end up with this nebulous mass of assumptions and not quite agreed elements and, not quite closed out program change or whatever it is. And it becomes just a really tough thing to manage.
Yeah, it's interesting points there, I suppose. The amount of stress that adds downstream to the people who work as well. Okay, should we cut that there? Move on to the next.
There was one point I thought
go
was
on.
worth making. And I personally don't have an issue with a cost-focused procurement process.
You don't?
I don't, but it's only providing you're getting the right price. And what I mean by that is, you go through and you price risk and you price that and providing there is a clear understanding of how much money there is and where it sits and that there is enough, then that removes one of the big stresses.
But that's the thing though, right? Like Matt said, you'd have all these tags and a whole lot of provisional sums that you price for because you don't have an accurate design.
Or on the flip side, you have a contractor who may not be experienced or not understand but wants to break into a new market and will price a lump sum with no tags because that's their approach to pricing packages of work. And you end up with an underqualified contractor who can't deliver that package of work, which is a huge risk for the main contractor.
Yeah.
So if you just go on straight price assessment, how do you identify that risk?
Oh, I'm not saying it's a straight price assessment, but I'm definitely thinking that the client organisations need to step up big time to ensure that the type of thing you're talking about doesn't happen. And they're perfectly entitled to do so, to create a procurement structure that ensures that, and of course, we actually want to provide opportunity for new contractors to enter the market. I mean, that's one of the key things. But we've got to make sure that they're doing it with the right capability.
But here's the thing, right? The organizations that actually represent the client, they sell the services to the client, helping. What's the dream that they sell? I'm keeping the big bad wolf, Mr. Contractor, away from your door.
Oh, look, you've thrown the hook, and I know you did it deliberately because I've got a real bugbear about this. So in the example, you're in a pure alliance, supposedly the most collaborative contract environment that can be created. And the problem is, though, that there's various agent provocateurs thrown into that process who are supposed to, be checking value for money and generally you've got your independent estimators. And of course, the problem being that if I'm an independent estimator, absolutely I'm going to try and find the fat and narrow things down and say you can't have that, you can't have that. But the problem being is that it creates a perverse outcome
100%.
because of the position of responsibility that person holds. Now, how can fair pricing exist if your only objective is to squeeze the contractor as much as you possibly can? And as you say, based sometimes, and with a pure alliance, you're talking generally about 30% design. You're not talking about anything further than that. So it's and again, I think it falls back onto the client to be incredibly clear what it is they're expecting from all the participants in that process. And so, and with fair pricing right at the height of that.
Perfect well staff.
I was just going to say, just on that point around the collaborative nature of a head contractor or alliance, so what you often find is the main contractor has a procurement letting process that defines that they have to get 3 prices, and often the principal may make the main contractor be obliged to accept the lowest price. And that's often because the cost consultants want to go in and say, okay, we're going to take those 3 prices and we're going to take the lowest, and that demonstrates that you're getting the most value for money. At that stage, at that subcontractor level, that's a lot of the time is where the attributes of that subcontractor fall out the door.
You're exactly right. Yeah, it feels like, as you said, at the different tiers, the values are diluted
100%,
each time you step down. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you got 3 different, well, perhaps up to 10 main contractors tendering the job. Each one of those is going to be going out to a plethora of subcontractors. Some of them will be common amongst them, others won't be. So, that dilution is going right up to the point where the main contractor's trying to plug all the contingency required where there's design risk or where there's, if it's 60 or 70% design, because they're very quick to say, oh, that price is too high. There's too much fat in there, but they're not quick to throw back. Oh, we realise there's a bit of a design issue there.
There is.
So we'll let you fatten that one up.
There is a human factor, though, and I mean, again, an unnamed organisation that I spent a bit of time with had one of their very senior guys leave the organisation. And the thing that was his tipping point was that they put a subcontractor out of business.
Mm.
And he said, I've been with this organisation 25 years and I've never put anyone out of business. And that's the human factor of saying we actually get alongside each other. We make sure that nobody's going to take too much pain or at least is going to share in whatever pain is coming. And I think that's a really important cornerstone for any principal in New Zealand's construction industry, is to say, you know, when we take a subcontractor on board, we're taking a responsibility to look after them, as well as to get accountability or performance or whatever the other things we normally talk about are.